Tonight, we step into the world of one of the most misunderstood civilizations in human history, ancient Rome. An empire built on discipline and ambition, a world of marching legions, powerful emperors, towering marble statues, and political rivalries so intense they reshaped history. Rome was a stage for triumph and tragedy alike, a place where loyalty could turn to betrayal overnight, and where legends were born in fire and blood. It's the civilization that gave us epic conquests, grand architecture, dramatic assassinations, and yes, the infamous story of an emperor who supposedly played music while his city burned. But Rome is more than myths and dramatic moments. It's a story of power, survival, innovation, corruption, resilience, and transformation. And tonight, we begin that journey. Before we dive in, if you enjoy deep historical storytelling like this, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I create here. Your support truly makes these stories possible, and I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location and the time where you are right now in the comments. Let's see how far this journey through ancient Rome reaches across the globe. Ancient Rome wasn't what you think. Tonight, we step into one of the most misrepresented civilizations in human history, ancient Rome. An empire of marble monuments, iron discipline, political intrigue, gladiators drenched in blood, emperors watching cities burn. At least, that's the version we've been sold. But Rome wasn't a movie set. It was far more complex, and in many ways, far more interesting. Let's begin by dismantling some of the most stubborn myths ever attached to the Roman world. Picture the arena. Two gladiators face each other in the sand. The crowd screams. One falls. The emperor lifts his thumb. Down. Death. That's how films show it. Reality, very different. If every match ended in execution, Rome would have burned through gladiators faster than it could train them. And training them was expensive. Gladiators lived in professional schools called ludi. They were fed high-calorie diets, trained intensely, and treated by physicians skilled in sports injuries. They were investments. Many fights were strategically paired. Heavy armor versus speed, shield versus net, strength versus agility. It was staged for suspense. The risk of death made it thrilling, but guaranteed death would have ruined the business model. Most defeated fighters could signal surrender. The crowd reacted. The sponsor of the games made the decision. Survival was common, especially for skilled or popular fighters. And yes, they were celebrities. In Pompeii, their names were scratched into walls like ancient fan messages. You don't build a fanbase if you're dead after your first appearance. The arena was brutal, but it was also commercial entertainment. Now about that dramatic gesture. We assume a downward thumb meant death. But ancient sources never clearly say that. They use the phrase pollice verso, with a turned thumb. That's it, no direction specified. Some historians believe an extended thumb symbolized an unsheathed sword. Kill him. A closed fist may have meant mercy. The entire thumbs down equals execution image largely comes from an 1872 painting by Jean-Léon Gérôme titled Pollice Verso. It was powerful. It shaped popular imagination. Hollywood followed. But paintings aren't evidence. They're interpretation. In truth, the decision was political theater. The crowd shouted. Sponsors weighed popularity. It wasn't a silent emperor flipping a switch. It was chaos. Very Roman chaos. The Roman dinner myth goes like this. Eat, recline, overindulge, visit the vomitorium, return refreshed. No, a vomitorium was an architectural exit corridor in amphitheaters, designed to spew forth crowds efficiently. It had nothing to do with purging food. Did elites overeat? Of course. Did some individuals force themselves to vomit? Possibly. But Rome did not design buildings with official vomit chambers. Most Romans weren't reclining at marble banquets anyway. They were eating bread, olives, porridge, and whatever modest protein they could afford. The decadence narrative is convenient. It just isn't the whole story. The image is iconic. Rome in flames. Emperor Nero calmly playing music. Problem 1. Violins didn't exist in 64 CE. Problem 2. According to several ancient sources, Nero wasn't even in Rome when the Great Fire began. He was in Antium and returned after hearing the news. Did he enjoy performing music publicly? Yes. Did many Romans find that embarrassing for an emperor? Absolutely. Did he build the extravagant Domus Aurea afterward, fueling suspicion? Yes. But the idea of him serenading a burning capital likely comes from hostile writers like Tacitus and Suetonius, writing after his death under regimes that disliked him. The story survives because it's symbolic, not because it's proven. This one quietly reshapes how people understand Rome. Julius Caesar was never emperor. He was dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. At the time, Rome was still technically a republic, with senators, magistrates, and elections, though the system was under severe strain. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, he triggered civil war. He won. He accumulated power. He centralized authority, but he never held the formal title of emperor. After his assassination in 44 BCE, his adopted heir Octavian eventually became Augustus, the first true Roman emperor. Ironically, killing Caesar didn't save the republic. It paved the way for empire. You've probably heard the date, 476 CE. That's when Romulus Augustulus, the last Western Roman emperor, was deposed by Odoacer. But Rome didn't just collapse like a dropped statue. Political instability, economic strain, military pressure, civil wars. These problems had been building for generations. And the Eastern Roman Empire, what we call the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly 1,000 more years from Constantinople. Rome didn't disappear, it transformed. The Roman legion is often imagined as unstoppable. Disciplined, yes. Organized, absolutely. Invincible, no. In 9 CE, 3 Roman legions were annihilated in the Teutoburg forest by Arminius and Germanic forces. It was a catastrophe. They also suffered defeat against Parthian cavalry at Carrhae. Rome's strength wasn't perfection, it was resilience. They rebuilt, they restructured, they adapted, until eventually they couldn't anymore. There's a persistent image of Romans living in filth. But Roman cities had public bath complexes with hot rooms, cold plunges, exercise areas, and social spaces. Aqueducts carried fresh water across vast distances. Sewage systems like the Cloaca Maxima drained waste. They didn't understand germ theory. Bath water was shared. Soap wasn't used the way we use it. But by ancient standards, Rome was impressively invested in hygiene infrastructure. Ironically, some later European cities were less sanitary. Yes, elites held extravagant banquets. Yes, certain emperors, like Caligula or Commodus, earned reputations for excess. But most Romans were bakers, merchants, artisans, farmers, soldiers, teachers. Empires are not sustained by wine and marble alone. They're sustained by administration, taxation, logistics, law, and routine labor. Rome endured for centuries because it functioned, not because it partied. Rome was violent, it was ambitious, it was unequal, but it was also structured, disciplined, adaptable, and politically sophisticated. Its myths survive because they're dramatic. Its reality survives because it shaped the modern world. History is rarely as cinematic as we imagine, but it is almost always more complex. And complexity is far more interesting. If Rome had a shadow government, it wore armor. The Praetorian Guard began as an elite unit, hand-picked soldiers tasked with protecting Roman generals in the field during the late Republic. When Augustus, the first emperor, took power in 27 BCE, he transformed them into something permanent. They became his personal bodyguards, stationed in Rome itself, armed, organized, privileged, and dangerously close to the center of power. At first, there were about 9 cohorts, roughly 4,500 to 9,000 men. They were better paid than regular legionaries. They served shorter terms. They enjoyed influence ordinary soldiers could only dream of. They were not stationed on distant frontiers. They were stationed in the capital. And that changed everything. In theory, the Praetorians protected the emperor. In practice, they often decided who the emperor would be. Their political influence exploded during the chaotic years after Augustus. By the 1st century CE, emperors understood a simple truth. If the guard supported you, you ruled. If they didn't, you probably wouldn't live long. In 41 CE, Emperor Caligula was murdered. Not by foreign enemies, not by invading armies, by members of his own Praetorian Guard. After years of erratic behavior and political humiliation, several officers decided enough was enough. They stabbed him in a palace corridor. Then something extraordinary happened. They didn't restore the Republic. They didn't consult the Senate. Instead, they found Caligula's uncle, Claudius, reportedly hiding behind a curtain in fear. And they declared him emperor. Just like that, the guard had crossed a line. They were no longer bodyguards. They were kingmakers. Now we reach one of the most astonishing moments in Roman history. In 193 CE, Emperor Pertinax tried to discipline the Praetorian Guard. He wanted financial reform, stricter control, less corruption. They killed him after just 3 months. Then, unbelievably, they auctioned off the empire. Literally, they invited wealthy bidders and offered the throne to whoever would pay the highest donative to the guard. The winner, Didius Julianus, who promised enormous sums of money. He became emperor because he paid more. The Roman Empire, the most powerful state in the Mediterranean, was sold like property. Julianus ruled for 9 weeks before he was executed by a rival general. But the damage was done. The illusion of imperial dignity had cracked. Imagine ruling Rome knowing the soldiers outside your palace could replace you. Emperors tried different strategies. Some showered the guard with gold. Others attempted reform. Some tried to control them through loyal commanders. One of the most infamous figures was Sejanus, commander of the Praetorian Guard under Emperor Tiberius. Sejanus consolidated the cohorts into a single fortified camp, the Castra Praetoria, just outside Rome. He became so powerful that many believed he was the true ruler. Until Tiberius turned on him. Sejanus was arrested and executed in 31 CE. But the guard remained, and their influence only grew. For nearly 3 centuries, the Praetorian Guard manipulated succession, intimidated senators, and occasionally murdered emperors. Then came 312 CE. At the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine defeated his rival Maxentius, who had relied heavily on Praetorian support. Constantine understood something critical. The guard was too dangerous to exist. After his victory, he disbanded the Praetorian Guard entirely. Their fortified camp was dismantled. Their political power erased. Rome's most powerful bodyguards were gone. Not because they failed in battle, but because they had become too powerful for the throne they were meant to protect. The Praetorian Guard reveals something unsettling about Rome. The empire wasn't just built on legions and law. It was balanced on proximity. Who stood closest to power often controlled it. The Senate debated. The emperors decreed. But the men with swords in the palace corridors, they made history in silence. Rome didn't just fall because of external enemies. It also struggled with internal forces that blurred loyalty and ambition. And few groups embody that tension more than the Praetorian Guard. They were created to defend the emperor. Instead, they became the emperor's greatest threat. By the year 235 CE, Rome had ruled the Mediterranean world for nearly 3 centuries. It looked permanent. It wasn't. When Emperor Severus Alexander was murdered by his own troops, something snapped. What followed was 50 years of instability so intense that modern historians call it simply the crisis. And crisis is not exaggeration. Between 235 and 284 CE, Rome had over 20 emperors. Most did not die peacefully. Many ruled for only months. Several never even set foot in Rome. Generals declared themselves emperor with the support of their legions. Rival claimants marched against each other. Civil wars drained the treasury and shattered unity. The throne became a battlefield. And the army, once Rome's greatest strength, became politically unpredictable. If soldiers disliked their emperor, they replaced him, often violently. In 260 CE, the situation worsened. Emperor Valerian was captured alive by the Persian king Shapur I. A Roman emperor, taken prisoner by a foreign enemy. It was unthinkable, and the empire fractured. In the west, provinces broke away and formed the Gallic Empire, including Gaul and Britain. In the east, the city of Palmyra rose under the leadership of Queen Zenobia, creating a separate power structure. For a moment, Rome wasn't one empire. It was three. The illusion of invincibility was gone. While Rome fought itself, external enemies pressed in. Goths crossed the Danube. Germanic tribes raided deep into imperial territory. Persians advanced in the east. Cities that had known peace for generations suddenly faced siege. Frontiers cracked. Defensive lines thinned. And everywhere, fear spread. War is expensive. Civil war is catastrophic. To pay armies, emperors began debasing Roman currency, reducing the silver content in coins. At first, citizens didn't notice. Then prices began rising. Inflation spiraled. Confidence collapsed. Trade suffered. Taxation grew harsher to compensate. Farmers abandoned land. Cities shrank. The Roman economy, once a vast network of stability, became unstable and unpredictable. And instability breeds more instability. As if war and economic collapse weren't enough, disease spread through the empire. The plague of Cyprian, likely some form of smallpox or similar epidemic, devastated cities in the mid-3rd century. Ancient accounts describe thousands dying daily in Rome. Population declined. Military recruitment became harder. Tax revenue shrank further. The empire was fighting enemies on every side, including microscopic ones. And yet, Rome did not collapse. Because a series of hard, practical, military-minded rulers emerged. They are often called the soldier emperors. Among them, one stands out. Aurelian. He reunited the empire in the 270s CE by defeating both the Gallic breakaway state and Queen Zenobia's eastern regime. He restored borders. He reasserted authority. He even built massive defensive walls around Rome, the Aurelian Walls, acknowledging that the capital itself was no longer untouchable. It was a moment of realism. Rome was no longer in expansion mode. It was in survival mode. This is what makes the 3rd century so fascinating. By every measure, political, economic, military, demographic, Rome should have collapsed. But it didn't. Why? Because Rome adapted. Emperors restructured the army. Frontiers were fortified differently. Administrative divisions became more regional. Eventually, in 284 CE, a man named Diocletian took power. He introduced radical reforms, dividing imperial authority among multiple rulers in a system called the Tetrarchy. It was not elegant, but it was practical. Rome survived, not because it was morally pure, not because it was unstoppable, but because it was flexible. The crisis of the 3rd century wasn't the fall of Rome. It was the warning. It showed how fragile even the most powerful empires can become when military loyalty replaces civic stability. When currency weakens. When disease spreads. When leadership turns into rapid turnover. Sound familiar? History doesn't repeat, but it echoes. Rome's survival in the 3rd century wasn't guaranteed. It was earned, painfully. And it reshaped the empire forever. The Rome that emerged after 284 CE was no longer the Rome of Augustus. It was harder, more militarized, more bureaucratic, more divided. It had survived the storm. But it would never be the same. In 284 CE, after decades of chaos, a military officer named Diocletian seized power. He understood something that many before him had not. Rome was too big for one man. The empire stretched from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. No single ruler could respond quickly enough to invasions, rebellions, and economic crises across that scale. So Diocletian did something unthinkable. He split imperial authority. Instead of ruling alone, Diocletian created the Tetrarchy, a system of 4 emperors. 2 senior rulers called Augusti, 2 junior rulers called Caesars. Each governed a different region of the empire. It was not division, it was coordination. Each ruler could respond to threats locally. Succession was planned. Authority was structured. Military control was distributed. For the first time in decades, there was stability. But stability came at a cost. Earlier emperors had maintained the illusion that they were first citizens. Diocletian abandoned that illusion. He elevated the emperor into something closer to a divine monarch. Subjects were expected to bow. Court ceremony became elaborate. Imperial authority became distant, sacred, untouchable. The Republic was no longer even a memory. Rome had transformed into an openly autocratic state. It was no longer pretending to be what it once was. The crisis had wrecked the currency. Inflation had spiraled. Trust had evaporated. Diocletian responded with aggressive reforms. He reorganized taxation. He made professions hereditary in some cases, binding farmers to land, sons to fathers' trades. And most famously, he issued the edict on maximum prices in 301 CE, attempting to legally cap prices across the empire. It was ambitious. It mostly failed. Black markets flourished. But the intention reveals something important. The empire was now actively managing its economy, not simply reacting. Rome had become bureaucratic, structured, controlled, and then came religion. By the late 3rd century, Christianity had spread significantly throughout the empire. It was still a minority faith, but it was growing. Diocletian believed Rome's strength depended on unity, including religious unity. In 303 CE, he launched what became known as the Great Persecution. Churches were destroyed, Christian scriptures were burned, believers were imprisoned, tortured, executed. It was the most systematic persecution Christians had ever faced under Rome. And it failed. Christianity did not disappear, it endured, and within decades, it would rise. Here is the most remarkable part. In 305 CE, Diocletian did something no Roman emperor had ever done voluntarily. He abdicated. He stepped down. He retired to a palace on the Adriatic coast, modern-day Split, Croatia, and reportedly spent his remaining years tending gardens. When asked to return to power during later instability, he allegedly replied that if the messengers could see his cabbages, they would understand why he preferred farming to ruling. After decades of chaos, Rome had an emperor who left peacefully. It was almost absurdly calm. But the tetrarchy did not last. Power struggles returned, civil wars resumed, and out of that chaos rose one of the most consequential figures in Roman history. Constantine. In 312 CE, before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine reportedly saw a vision in the sky, a Christian symbol, the Chi Rho, with the words, "In this sign, conquer." He ordered the symbol painted on his soldiers' shields. He won. Whether the vision was literal, symbolic, or political strategy, the effect was undeniable. Constantine embraced Christianity. In 313 CE, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance throughout the empire. Christianity was no longer illegal. It was protected. Imperial favor shifted. Churches were built. Clergy gained status. Within decades, Christianity would move from persecuted minority to dominant religion. Rome was changing not just politically, but spiritually. Constantine also made another monumental decision. He founded a new capital in 330 CE, on the site of Byzantium. He named it Constantinople. Strategically located between Europe and Asia, it controlled key trade routes and was easier to defend than Rome. Power shifted eastward. Rome, the city itself, was no longer the uncontested heart of the empire. The future belonged to the east. By the time Constantine died in 337 CE, Rome was almost unrecognizable compared to the age of Augustus. The emperor was openly autocratic. Christianity was rising to dominance. The capital had moved. The military was reorganized. The bureaucracy was massive. The old Roman world of senatorial debate and republican illusion was gone. In its place stood something new. A Christian empire, a divided administration, a state built not on expansion, but on endurance. The western half would still fall in 476 CE. The eastern half would endure until 1453. Rome did not vanish. It evolved. It shifted languages, religions, and capitals. But it never truly disappeared. Because Rome was never just a city. It was an idea that could survive emperors, survive crisis, even survive transformation. When Constantine died in 337 CE, he left behind a Christian empire with a new capital, Constantinople. But unity did not last. By 395 CE, after the death of Emperor Theodosius I, the empire was permanently divided between his two sons. East, West. The division was administrative, but the consequences would be permanent. The Eastern Roman Empire, wealthier, urbanized, strategically positioned, was stable. The Western Roman Empire, poorer, more rural, militarily strained, was vulnerable. The East had stronger tax revenue, stronger trade networks, stronger defensive geography. The West had long borders along the Rhine and Danube, vulnerable to migration and invasion. And pressure was building. In 376 CE, large groups of Goths, fleeing the Huns, crossed into Roman territory seeking refuge. Rome allowed them in, but Roman officials mistreated them. Corruption, exploitation, starvation, rebellion followed. In 378 CE, at the Battle of Adrianople, the Goths crushed the Roman army. Emperor Valens was killed, an emperor dead in battle. Again, the Roman military machine, once feared across continents, had suffered a catastrophic defeat. And this time, it was not easily reversed. For 800 years, Rome had not fallen to a foreign enemy. In 410 CE, that changed. The Visigoth king Alaric led his forces into the city of Rome itself. For 3 days, the city was looted. It was not total destruction, but symbolically, it was devastating. The eternal city had been breached. Across the Mediterranean world, shock rippled. If Rome could fall, what was permanent? The Western emperors increasingly ruled from Ravenna, a marsh-protected city easier to defend than Rome. But protection is not the same as strength. Real power shifted to military generals. Some of them were not even Roman by birth. Figures like Stilicho and later Ricimer controlled armies and influenced succession. The emperor became a symbol. The generals held the leverage. And the army was increasingly composed of federated Germanic troops, allies settled within Roman territory. Loyalty grew complicated. In 455 CE, the Vandals, who had already taken control of North Africa, sailed to Italy. They entered Rome. They looted it again. North Africa had been Rome's breadbasket. Now it was lost. Grain supply weakened. Tax revenue shrank. Military funding declined. The Western Empire was hemorrhaging resources. By the mid-5th century, Western emperors were often young, powerless figures placed on the throne by stronger men behind the scenes. In 476 CE, a Germanic leader named Odoacer deposed the teenage emperor Romulus Augustulus. He did not declare himself emperor. Instead, he sent the imperial insignia to Constantinople and ruled Italy as king. There was no dramatic final battle, no cinematic last stand, just a quiet administrative ending. The Western Roman Empire ceased to exist. The Eastern Roman Empire continued, centered in Constantinople, speaking Greek instead of Latin, Christian, bureaucratic, resilient. Today we call it the Byzantine Empire, but its citizens called themselves Roman. They preserved Roman law, Roman administration, Roman imperial identity, for nearly 1,000 more years. Until 1453, Rome did not fall once. It transformed multiple times. It wasn't decadence alone. It wasn't a single invasion. It wasn't Christianity. It was structural strain, military over-reliance on federated troops, loss of tax-rich provinces, political instability, economic fragmentation, demographic decline, internal power struggles. The Western Empire weakened slowly, like stone eroding under constant pressure. By 476, the structure was hollow, and hollow structures collapse quietly. Rome did not end in flames. It faded. It evolved into medieval kingdoms. Roman law influenced Europe. Roman roads continued to carry trade. The Church inherited administrative frameworks. The East continued as Byzantium. Rome became memory, and then legend, and then foundation. The world after 476 was not post-Roman. It was built on Rome's remains. In 527 CE, Emperor Justinian I took the throne in Constantinople. By this time, the Western Roman Empire had been gone for 50 years. Italy was ruled by Germanic kings. North Africa belonged to the Vandals. Spain was divided. The old Roman world of the Mediterranean had fractured. But Justinian believed something radical. Rome was not dead. It was unfinished. Justinian was not a battlefield general. But he understood ambition. He appointed one of the greatest military commanders of late antiquity, Belisarius. First target, North Africa. In 533 CE, Belisarius sailed across the Mediterranean and defeated the Vandals with stunning speed. Within a year, North Africa was Roman again. Next, Italy. The Gothic War began in 535 CE. It lasted nearly 2 decades. Rome changed hands multiple times. Cities were besieged. Italy was devastated. But eventually, it too returned to imperial control. For a moment, a brief, fragile moment, the Mediterranean looked Roman again. Justinian had nearly rebuilt the old empire. But Justinian's greatest achievement was not military. It was legal. He ordered the compilation of centuries of Roman law into a unified system known as the Corpus Juris Civilis. It organized, clarified, and preserved Roman legal principles. Contracts, property, citizenship, authority. This legal code would later influence medieval Europe, Renaissance scholarship, and eventually modern civil law systems across much of the world. Even when Justinian's conquests faded, his law endured. In many ways, this was Rome's most powerful weapon. Not swords, but structure. In 532 CE, after a violent uprising in Constantinople known as the Nika riots nearly destroyed the city, Justinian rebuilt. And he built magnificently. The Hagia Sophia rose from the ruins. Its massive dome seemed to float above light-filled space. Visitors described it as heaven suspended above earth. It was not merely architecture. It was a statement. Rome had not fallen. Rome had ascended. Christian, imperial, radiant. And then came disaster. In 541 CE, the plague of Justinian swept through the empire. Likely bubonic plague. Constantinople was devastated. Modern estimates suggest perhaps 25 to 50% of the population died in affected regions. Tax revenue plummeted. Armies weakened. Labor shortages spread. Justinian himself contracted the disease and survived. But the empire never fully recovered economically. The dream of restored Rome began to crack. By the time Justinian died in 565 CE, Italy was exhausted from war. North Africa was vulnerable. The treasury was strained. The population had declined. The empire had expanded, but it was stretched thin. Within decades, new enemies, the Lombards, Persians, and eventually Arab forces, would challenge its borders. The Mediterranean would never again be fully Roman. Justinian had achieved something remarkable, but he had also revealed something painful. The old Rome could not be permanently restored. History moves forward, not backward. After Justinian, the empire gradually became something distinct. Greek replaced Latin as the dominant administrative language. The military reorganized into regional themes. Christian theology shaped politics. The empire faced waves of new pressures. Persian wars, Arab expansion in the 7th century, Slavic migrations, internal religious conflicts. Yet Constantinople endured. Its massive Theodosian walls repelled sieges for centuries. Trade continued. Scholarship flourished. Roman identity evolved. But it never disappeared. They still called themselves Romans. In 1453, after more than 1,100 years of survival in the East, Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks. The last emperor, Constantine XI, died defending the city. The Roman Empire, in its final form, ended. But consider this. From Augustus in 27 BCE to 1453 CE, that is nearly 1,500 years of continuous imperial identity. Few political systems in human history have lasted so long. Rome did not fall once. It fell slowly in the West. It transformed in the East. It reformed under Diocletian. It spiritualized under Constantine. It expanded again under Justinian. It endured plague, invasion, division, and reinvention. And even after 1453, Roman law shaped Europe. Roman architecture influenced cathedrals. Roman governance informed kingdoms. Roman identity lived in language, religion, and culture. Rome is not just a chapter in history. It is a foundation. Not the marble fantasy, not the constant banquet, not the endless battlefield, but daily life. At its height in the 2nd century CE, the city of Rome may have held over 1 million people. That made it one of the largest cities in the world. It was loud, crowded, restless. The elite lived in spacious houses called domus, built around open courtyards with fountains and mosaics. But most Romans did not. Most lived in insulae, multi-story apartment blocks. And these were not luxury buildings. They were cramped, often poorly constructed. Fire was common. Collapse was not unheard of. The wealthy lived near the ground. The poor lived higher up. Because if the building fell, you wanted to be closer to the street. Rome was remarkably advanced in infrastructure. Aqueducts carried fresh water across vast distances. Public baths were social centers, places to wash, exercise, gossip, and conduct business. Bathing was routine. For a small fee, most urban citizens could enter. Public toilets existed too. Stone benches with keyhole-shaped openings lined the walls. There were no dividers. Privacy was not a Roman priority. They used a shared sponge on a stick, rinsed in running water, instead of modern paper. It sounds unpleasant, but by ancient standards, it was organized. The average Roman diet was simple. Bread was the foundation. Wheat was everything. The state even provided subsidized grain to many citizens, the annona. Olives, cheese, vegetables, occasional fish or meat if affordable, and one ingredient that defined Roman flavor, garum, a fermented fish sauce used on almost everything. Yes, almost everything. Street food existed. Thermopolia, small fast food counters, sold hot meals to people whose apartments had no proper kitchens. Wine was common, but usually diluted with water. Drinking undiluted wine was considered uncivilized. Rome ran on labor. Bakers rose before dawn. Blacksmiths hammered tools. Merchants argued prices in crowded markets. Teachers instructed children in rhetoric and literature. Doctors practiced medicine based on Greek theory. Lawyers argued cases in the forum. And beneath it all was enslaved labor. Slavery was everywhere. Households, mines, farms, administrative offices. Some enslaved people gained freedom and became freedmen, sometimes even wealthy. But the system was brutal. Daily life depended on inequality. That is an uncomfortable truth of Roman stability. Entertainment was constant. The Colosseum hosted gladiatorial games. The Circus Maximus hosted chariot races, drawing crowds of up to 150,000. Theaters staged comedies and tragedies. Public holidays filled the calendar. The phrase, bread and circuses, wasn't an insult. It was policy. Keep the population fed. Keep them entertained. Stability follows. At least for a while. Roman women could not vote. They could not hold office. But they were not invisible. Elite women managed households, property, and finances. Some influenced politics behind the scenes. Figures like Livia, wife of Augustus, shaped imperial decisions for decades. Wealthy widows could wield significant independence. Marriage was political. Family reputation mattered. Women's authority was often private, but powerful. Rome was patriarchal, but it was not simple. Religion wasn't a weekly ritual. It was constant. Households had small shrines to protective spirits. Public temples honored Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and dozens of other deities. Ritual mattered more than belief. Participation showed loyalty. Later, Christianity would rise, not replacing ritual immediately, but gradually reshaping identity. Religion in Rome was civic glue. It held communities together. Life in Rome was structured, but it was never entirely safe. Fire could spread quickly. Crime existed in crowded districts. Political accusations could destroy reputations. Executions were public. Power struggles were real. If you lived long enough, you would see emperors rise and fall. Civil wars erupt. Borders shift. Rome felt permanent. But beneath the marble, it was always balancing. Ancient Rome was not one thing. It was not only violence, not only decadence, not only glory. It was routine. It was paperwork. It was bread ovens and crowded streets. It was bureaucracy and belief. It was noise. It was ambition. It was fear. It was resilience. And perhaps that is why Rome fascinates us. Because it feels familiar. A massive city, political drama, economic pressure, social inequality, public spectacle, religious transformation. The more we strip away the myth, the more Rome looks like us. Rome believed in law. Rome believed in structure. But Rome also believed in making examples. Punishment was not just correction. It was performance. Crucifixion was not invented by Rome. But Rome perfected it as terror. Reserved primarily for enslaved people, rebels, and non-citizens, it was designed for maximum humiliation. Victims were stripped, beaten, forced to carry part of their cross, then nailed or tied in place. Death did not come quickly. It came slowly, through exhaustion, suffocation, dehydration, sometimes over days. After the rebellion of Spartacus in 71 BCE, thousands of captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way. Imagine walking into Rome past miles of bodies. The message was simple: rebellion ends like this. Roman citizens were almost never crucified. Status mattered, even in death. Some criminals were sentenced to damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. In the arena, before a crowd, prisoners were exposed to lions, bears, or other animals imported from across the empire. It was execution and entertainment combined. The crowd watched. The state demonstrated power. Life was reduced to spectacle. This was not random cruelty. It was controlled intimidation. If a legion showed cowardice or mutiny, commanders could order decimation. 1 in every 10 soldiers was selected by lot. The chosen men were beaten to death by their own comrades. It was rare, but the threat was enough. Discipline in Rome was absolute. Sometimes the punishment was not physical. It was erasure, damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory. If a ruler or official fell from favor, their name could be removed from inscriptions. Their statues defaced, their portraits destroyed. Officially, they had never existed. In a society obsessed with legacy and reputation, this was devastating. To Romans, immortality lived in memory. To erase someone was to kill them twice. Executions were not hidden. They were public. Crowds gathered. Children watched. Vendors sold food. Death was normalized. The state reinforced order through visibility. Justice was not quiet. It was educational. You obeyed not only because of law. You obeyed because you had seen what happened when others did not. Modern audiences often ask, why so brutal? Because Rome governed vast, diverse populations with limited communication technology. There were no rapid response systems. No modern prisons. No long-term rehabilitation programs. Fear traveled faster than mercy. Public punishment deterred rebellion more efficiently than private incarceration. Rome calculated, and Rome chose intimidation. Roman law also introduced concepts that shaped modern systems. Presumption of innocence for citizens. Legal representation. Written codes. Structured courts. Brutal spectacle coexisted with legal sophistication. That contradiction is deeply Roman. Order and violence. Structure and fear. Civilization and cruelty. Rome did not just conquer territory. It conquered imagination. If you were a provincial governor thinking about rebellion, you remembered the crosses. If you were a soldier considering mutiny, you remembered decimation. If you were a senator plotting against the emperor, you knew memory itself could be erased. Power in Rome was physical, but it was also psychological. And here's the unsettling truth. The Roman Empire lasted so long not just because of military strength, but because it mastered the art of deterrence. Fear, carefully displayed, can stabilize a state for centuries, until it no longer works. Rome did not invent political murder, but it normalized it. If you reached the top of Roman power, you lived with one certainty: Someone was thinking about replacing you. And in Rome, replacement often meant removal. 44 BCE. The Senate chamber. Julius Caesar enters, unaware that dozens of senators are armed. They surround him. At first, it looks like a petition. Then steel flashes. 23 stab wounds. Among the attackers were men he trusted. They believed they were saving the Republic. They were wrong. Instead of restoring freedom, the assassination triggered civil war. The Republic died. An empire emerged. Rome learned something that day. Killing a ruler does not restore stability. It destabilizes everything. And yet, they kept doing it. Blades were dramatic. Poison was subtle. Imperial Rome was obsessed with succession. And succession meant intrigue. Whispers surrounded figures like Livia, wife of Augustus. Ancient sources accused her, perhaps unfairly, of eliminating rivals to secure her son's rise. Later, Emperor Claudius reportedly died after eating poisoned mushrooms, possibly administered by his wife Agrippina, who wanted her son Nero on the throne. Were all these accusations true? We cannot know. Roman historians loved scandal, but the atmosphere itself tells us something. The imperial palace was a place of paranoia. Food was tested. Servants were watched. Trust was fragile. If you were emperor, your greatest threat was often your own bodyguard. The Praetorian Guard murdered Caligula in 41 CE. They killed Pertinax in 193 CE. They removed rulers who disappointed them. They supported others for money. The throne in Rome was never fully secure. It rested on the loyalty of armed men within walking distance. And loyalty could be purchased. Or lost. After Emperor Septimius Severus died, he left power jointly to his sons, Caracalla and Geta. It did not work. The rivalry turned toxic. Eventually, Caracalla arranged a meeting in their mother's chambers. Assassins rushed in. Geta was cut down, reportedly in his mother's arms. Afterward, Caracalla ordered a purge. Geta's name was erased, his images destroyed. Damnatio memoriae. Assassination in Rome was not always external. Sometimes it was family. There were years when emperors fell so quickly they barely warmed the throne. 69 CE, the year of 4 emperors. 193 CE, the year of 5 emperors. Each claimant backed by legions. Each promising payment. Each vulnerable. In such an environment, assassination became strategy. You did not wait for the battlefield. You struck first. Rome's political culture quietly accepted this. Violence was not shocking. It was expected. Because power in Rome was personal. There were no elections for emperor. No constitutional transfer of power. Legitimacy came from military support, political alliances, public approval, control of the capital. If any of those collapsed, your position collapsed with it. Rome was not a democracy. It was not fully hereditary monarchy. It was something in between. And in that gray space, daggers thrived. Imagine ruling knowing your guard could turn. Your general could declare himself emperor. Your wife might favor your rival. Your senate could conspire. Your son might resent you. Emperors slept lightly. Many executed preemptively. Many ruled through fear. Some became tyrants not because they were insane, but because they understood how fragile their position was. When trust disappears, suspicion becomes policy. Out of roughly 70 Roman emperors in the first 400 years of empire, a large portion died violently. Assassination, execution, battle, forced suicide. Peaceful old age was rare. Power in Rome was never static. It was negotiated daily, often with blood. Here is the paradox. Despite constant plots, murders, betrayals, the empire survived for centuries. Why? Because assassination removed individuals. But the system remained. Governors collected taxes. Armies defended borders. Courts administered law. Rome was bigger than any one emperor. Even when emperors fell in corridors, the machinery continued turning. Dangerous does not always mean insane. Sometimes it means unpredictable. Sometimes paranoid. Sometimes brilliant and ruthless. Let's begin. When Caligula took power, Rome celebrated. He was young, charismatic, the son of a beloved general. Then something shifted. Ancient sources describe a severe illness early in his reign. After that, accounts paint a darker picture. Public humiliations of senators, lavish spending, arbitrary executions. He allegedly declared himself divine, threatened to appoint his horse as consul. Was he insane, or was he deliberately dismantling the Senate's dignity to assert absolute authority? The truth is difficult to separate from propaganda, but one fact remains. The Praetorian Guard assassinated him after just 4 years. In Rome, even emperors could not rule without limits. Nero inherited power at 16. At first, he ruled under capable advisors. Then gradually, he removed rivals. His own mother, Agrippina, was murdered on his orders. Political opponents were forced to commit suicide. After the Great Fire of 64 CE, suspicion followed him. He built the lavish Domus Aurea while much of Rome rebuilt. He blamed Christians. Persecutions followed. He loved performance, music, poetry, theater, and demanded audiences applaud him. To some, he was an artist misunderstood. To others, a narcissist ruling an empire as a stage. Eventually, the army revolted. Abandoned by his guard, Nero committed suicide. His final reported words, "What an artist dies in me." Rome did not mourn. Son of the philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Raised in privilege, expected to continue stability. Instead, Commodus became obsessed with spectacle. He fought in the arena as a gladiator, carefully staged, of course. He styled himself as Hercules reborn, renamed Rome after himself, executed senators, ruled through paranoia. To the elite, this was humiliation. To the empire, instability. In 192 CE, he was strangled in his bath by a wrestling partner. The Senate declared him a public enemy, and Rome slid toward crisis. Caracalla ruled with suspicion. He murdered his brother Geta. He ordered thousands executed afterward. Yet he also issued the Constitutio Antoniniana in 212 CE, granting Roman citizenship to nearly all free men in the empire. A dramatic expansion of identity. Was it generosity, or a way to increase tax revenue? Both, perhaps. He admired Alexander the Great, sought military glory, distrusted nearly everyone. In 217 CE, while on campaign, he was assassinated by a soldier during a roadside stop. Even brutality does not guarantee security. Domitian was competent, administratively effective, financially disciplined, but deeply suspicious. He executed senators for perceived disloyalty, demanded to be addressed as Lord and God, expanded imperial authority aggressively. The Senate hated him. In 96 CE, members of his own court assassinated him. After his death, his memory was condemned. Damnatio memoriae. Competence did not protect him. Perception mattered, not madness alone, but instability. An emperor who ignored elite support, alienated the army, ruled through fear alone, humiliated power structures, failed to secure succession. In Rome, power required balance. Too soft, and you were replaced. Too cruel, and you were conspired against. Too weak, and the army chose someone else. Too theatrical, and respect evaporated. The throne demanded constant calibration. We imagine Roman emperors as all-powerful, but in reality, they walked a narrow path. Between Senate and army, between popularity and authority, between generosity and control, dangerous emperors disrupted that balance. And Rome corrected them, often with blades. Here's the deeper truth. Rome survived bad emperors, because its system was layered. Governors continued administering provinces. Legions defended borders. Courts applied law. Trade continued. The emperor was powerful, but the empire was structural. When one failed, another replaced him. Sometimes violently, but the machine endured. Not through sudden conquest, not through revolution, but through endurance. In the 1st century CE, Christianity was not a global religion. It was a small Jewish sect in Roman Judea. Its followers believed that Jesus of Nazareth had been crucified under Roman authority and had risen from the dead. To Roman officials, this was not immediately threatening. Rome tolerated many religions, as long as they did not disrupt order. as long as they participated in civic ritual. That last part became the problem. Romans did not demand private belief. They demanded public participation. Burn incense to the emperor. Honor the state gods. Show loyalty through ritual. Christians refused. They would not sacrifice to Jupiter. They would not call the emperor divine. To Roman authorities, this looked like political defiance, not just religious difference. Christianity also met in private homes, called each other brothers and sisters, spoke of a kingdom not of this world. Rumors spread, suspicion grew, persecutions were not constant. They flared in waves. Under Nero after the Great Fire of 64 CE, under Decius in the 3rd century, and most severely under Diocletian in 303 CE, the Great Persecution. Churches were destroyed, scriptures burned, believers imprisoned or executed. But something unexpected happened. Martyrdom strengthened identity. Stories of endurance spread. Communities grew tighter. Christianity did not disappear. It grew. Christianity offered something Rome did not: universal belonging. In a world divided by class, citizenship, and status, Christianity said, slave and free are equal before God. Women found community and leadership roles within early churches. The poor found dignity. The message was simple. Salvation was not tied to wealth, rank, or Roman birth. It was spiritual, and it crossed boundaries easily. Trade routes carried it. Urban networks amplified it. By the 3rd century, Christianity had spread throughout the empire. Still illegal, but increasingly visible. In 312 CE, before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine claimed to see a vision, a Christian symbol promising victory. He adopted it. He won. In 313 CE, the Edict of Milan legalized Christianity. This was not yet dominance, but it was protection. Imperial favor followed. Churches were funded. Clergy gained influence. Within decades, Christianity moved from persecuted minority to state-supported religion. Power had shifted, quietly, irreversibly. In 380 CE, Emperor Theodosius I declared Christianity the official religion of the empire. Pagan temples lost state support. Traditional rituals declined. The religious landscape transformed. This was not immediate erasure. It was gradual dominance. Within a century, Rome, once defined by Jupiter and Mars, identified itself through Christ. The empire had spiritually reinvented itself. It altered law. It reshaped morality. It transformed imperial identity. Emperors now ruled not just by military authority, but by divine mandate interpreted through Christian theology. The church developed structure. Bishops gained regional power. The Bishop of Rome, later the Pope, emerged as a central religious figure. When the Western Empire fell in 476 CE, the church remained. In many regions, it became the primary source of stability. Rome had shifted from imperial capital to spiritual center. Rome tried to eliminate Christianity. Instead, it adopted it. Christianity survived persecution, then inherited the empire, and when imperial structures faded in the West, Christian administration preserved literacy, law, and organization. The persecuted became foundational. The rise of Christianity did not destroy Rome. It transformed it. The Roman Empire became a Christian empire. The Byzantine Empire became a Christian empire. Medieval Europe inherited Roman law and Christian structure. The symbols changed. The language evolved. But continuity remained. Rome had always been adaptable. Christianity was not an end. It was another evolution. Rome ran on labor, and much of that labor was enslaved. Not as a side system, not as a minor institution, but as a central engine of the empire. Most enslaved people in Rome were prisoners of war. As Rome expanded, it absorbed entire populations. Captured soldiers, civilians, children. Others were born into slavery. Some were sold into slavery due to debt. Piracy also supplied human cargo. There was no racial basis as in later Atlantic slavery. Slavery in Rome was based on conquest and status. Anyone outside Roman protection could become property. And legally, that is what enslaved people were. Property, not citizens, not persons under law. Property. Their experiences varied drastically. Some worked in households, cooking, cleaning, tutoring children. Educated Greek slaves sometimes served as teachers or secretaries. Others labored in brutal conditions. Agricultural estates, latifundia, mines, quarries, galleys. Mine labor was often a death sentence. Short life expectancy, relentless conditions, little chance of survival. Slavery in Rome was not uniform, but at its worst, it was merciless. Yes, and this complicates the picture. Manumission, the act of freeing a slave, was relatively common. A loyal household slave might earn freedom. Freedmen, liberty, became Roman citizens, though with social limitations. Some became wealthy, some entered business, some even rose to influential administrative roles. But freedom did not erase stigma. A freedman's background was remembered, and millions never reached that point. The most famous slave rebellion was led by Spartacus, a gladiator who escaped training school with dozens of others. The rebellion grew into tens of thousands. For 2 years, they defeated Roman forces repeatedly. It terrified the Republic. Eventually, Roman legions crushed the revolt. 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way. Rome responded not with negotiation, but with spectacle. The message was clear: resistance would be annihilated. Imagine waking every day knowing you could be beaten legally, sold, separated from family, punished without trial. Your testimony in court could require torture to be accepted as valid. You had no legal identity independent of your owner. Even kind masters held absolute power, and kindness was not guaranteed. Rome expanded rapidly. Conquest brought wealth. Wealth required labor. Massive estates produced grain for cities. Mines produced metals. Households displayed status through servants. The Roman elite's lifestyle was inseparable from enslaved labor. Without slavery, Rome's economic model would have looked very different. Rome produced philosophy, law, engineering, architecture, literature, and at the same time, normalized human ownership. This contradiction is not unique to Rome, but in Rome, it was foundational. Even philosophers who wrote about virtue owned slaves. Even reformers rarely questioned the institution itself. The system was too embedded, too profitable, too normal. Slavery helped stabilize Rome economically, but it also created fear. Slave uprisings, urban anxiety, strict control systems, laws regulating behavior. Roman society was layered. At the top, senators and equestrians. Below, common citizens. Below, freedmen. At the base, enslaved people. The structure was rigid, but never entirely secure. When we admire Roman roads, Roman law, Roman architecture, we must remember, much of it was built by forced labor. Rome's greatness cannot be separated from its inequality. That is part of its truth, and part of why it feels so modern. Rome admired strength, but strength was not only physical. In a world of assassination, political instability, exile, and public humiliation, you needed something internal, something steady. That something was Stoicism. Stoicism began in Greece in the 3rd century BCE, but in Rome, it became something practical. Not abstract theory, not academic debate, but survival training for the soul. 3 names define Roman Stoicism: Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. Each lived very different lives. Each faced immense pressure, and each asked the same question: how do you remain steady when everything around you is unstable? Seneca was advisor to Emperor Nero. He was wealthy, influential, respected, and constantly in danger. He wrote about self-control, restraint, emotional discipline. Then Nero turned against him. Accused of conspiracy, ordered to commit suicide. Seneca accepted it calmly, opened his veins, dictated philosophical reflections as he died. Whether entirely composed or not, the story became symbolic. The Stoic ideal: control what you can, accept what you cannot, even death. Epictetus began life enslaved. His master reportedly broke his leg. He gained freedom later, and he taught something radical. You do not control events. You control your response. If someone insults you, that is external. If someone exiles you, that is external. If someone enslaves your body, that is external. Your mind is yours. No emperor can take that. For Romans living under unpredictable rulers, this was powerful. Perhaps the most famous Stoic was Emperor Marcus Aurelius. He ruled during wars, plague, and internal strain. And at night, in military camps along the frontier, he wrote private notes to himself. Those notes became meditations. They were not speeches, not propaganda, but reminders. You will face criticism. You will face betrayal. You will face death. Do your duty anyway. Be just anyway. Remain calm anyway. For an emperor surrounded by flattery and danger, Stoicism was armor. Stoicism is often misunderstood as emotional suppression. It is not about feeling nothing. It is about mastering reaction. Core principles included: focus only on what you control, accept fate without resentment, live according to reason, practice self-discipline, remember death daily. Romans practiced memento mori, remember you will die, not to become depressed, but to remove fear. If death is inevitable, panic is pointless. Rome was chaotic at the top. Emperors rose and fell, political alliances shifted, military loyalties wavered, wealth could vanish, reputation could be destroyed overnight. Stoicism gave Roman elites a mental framework. If exile came, endure it. If power came, do not cling to it. If insult came, ignore it. It was psychological stability in an unstable system. Many Stoics were wealthy, powerful, connected to the state, and yet they preached detachment. Why? Because they knew how fragile their position was. Stoicism was not a rejection of Rome. It was a coping mechanism within it. Rome mastered external control through law and force. Stoicism mastered internal control through thought. The empire fell in the West. The structures changed, but Stoic writings survived, influencing medieval thinkers, Renaissance scholars, modern psychology. In many ways, Stoicism is one of Rome's most enduring legacies. Not roads, not arenas, but mindset. Rome teaches two parallel lessons. Power requires force, but survival requires resilience. Empires crumble, structures shift, politics fail, but the ability to govern yourself, that endures. Perhaps that is why Stoicism feels modern. Because instability feels modern, and Rome understood instability better than most civilizations in history. Not the polished marble statue, not the heroic movie version, but the actual soldier, the one who marched, dug, built, fought, and repeated it all the next day. During the Republic, soldiers were citizen farmers. They served temporarily, returned home after campaigns. But by the late Republic, especially after reforms by Gaius Marius, Rome created a professional army. Men enlisted for long terms, eventually 20 to 25 years. This was not seasonal service. It was a career. Many recruits were poor citizens. For them, the army meant stable pay, food, equipment, potential land grants after retirement. Rome offered something powerful: security. In a volatile world, that mattered. Training was relentless. Recruits practiced with wooden swords heavier than real ones. They drilled with oversized shields. They marched up to 20 miles a day carrying 30 to 40 kilograms of gear. They built full fortified camps every single night on campaign. Every night, ditches dug, walls raised, tents arranged in strict formation. This wasn't optional. It was survival. Discipline was absolute. Cowardice could mean execution. Desertion meant death. Rome didn't need superhuman warriors. It needed obedient ones. A legionary typically carried gladius, short stabbing sword; pilum, heavy throwing spear designed to bend on impact; scutum, large curved shield; body armor, often larica segmentata. The key wasn't flash. It was coordination. The Roman style favored thrusting over slashing. A quick stab behind the shield wall. Minimal exposure. Maximum damage. Battle wasn't chaos. It was controlled violence. Many soldiers died not in battle, but from exhaustion, disease, malnutrition, exposure. Campaigns stretched for months, sometimes years. Frontiers were harsh. Germania's forests, Britain's cold rains, Syrian deserts. Rome fought everywhere, and the soldier endured everywhere. Camp life was structured. 8 men shared a tent. They cooked together, 8 basic rations: grain, bread, salted meat, vinegar diluted in water, posca. They repaired gear, maintained weapons, stood guard rotations. Free time existed, but boredom could be dangerous. Gambling was common, so were fights. The army was its own society. Roman discipline was infamous. One extreme example: decimation. If a unit mutinied or showed cowardice, every 10th man was executed by his comrades. It was rare, but the threat mattered. Order was non-negotiable. The legion functioned because fear reinforced hierarchy. After service, a soldier might receive land, a cash bonus, citizenship, 4 auxiliaries. Veterans settled in frontier regions, spreading Roman culture, Roman language, Roman law. The army didn't just conquer territory, it Romanized it. Rome suffered devastating defeats. The disaster in the Teutoburg Forest, 9 CE, wiped out 3 legions. Defeats against Parthian cavalry were humiliating. Civil wars drained manpower. The army was powerful, but not mythical. Its true strength was recovery, rebuilding after failure, adapting tactics, maintaining structure. Imagine serving 25 years, marching thousands of miles, watching friends die, facing enemies who fight differently each time, then returning home older, scarred, changed. The legion created veterans who were both disciplined and hardened. The empire depended on them, but rarely romanticized their suffering. Rome's expansion was not magic, not destiny, not divine favor. It was logistics, engineering, relentless drilling, and ordinary men doing extraordinary labor repeatedly. The legion was Rome's backbone, but also its burden. When recruitment declined, when loyalty shifted to individual generals, when political instability infected the ranks, the machine weakened. And when the machine weakened, the empire followed. Roman law did not allow women to vote. They could not sit in the Senate. They could not command legions. On paper, their power was limited. In practice, it was complicated. When Augustus transformed Rome from republic to empire, he did not do it alone. At his side stood Livia Drusilla. Careful, measured, politically intelligent, she advised Augustus for decades, managed networks of alliances, positioned her son Tiberius as successor. Ancient historians sometimes portray her as manipulative, but manipulation in Rome was simply politics without a title. Livia cultivated an image of modesty and traditional virtue, publicly restrained, privately strategic. After Augustus' death, she was granted the title Augusta, a rare recognition. Her influence lasted long after his. Few women in Roman history were as openly ambitious as Agrippina, daughter of Germanicus, sister of Caligula, wife of Claudius, mother of Nero. She arranged her marriage to Emperor Claudius, secured Nero's adoption, positioned her son as heir. For a time, she appeared on coins alongside the emperor, an extraordinary visual statement. Her visibility was intentional. She wielded influence openly, and it frightened the male elite. Eventually, Nero turned against her. He had her killed, but for years, she shaped imperial policy, without ever sitting in the Senate. Born in Syria, Julia Domna married Septimius Severus. She traveled with the army, earned the title Mater Castrorum, mother of the camp. She surrounded herself with philosophers and scholars, maintained correspondence with officials, managed administration during campaigns. After her son Caracalla murdered his brother Geta, she remained politically central. Her court became an intellectual hub. She did not simply influence power, she stabilized it. Her suicide after Caracalla's death marked the end of an era. How did these women exert influence? Through marriage alliances, motherhood of heirs, patronage networks, financial control, social reputation, private counsel. Roman politics was personal. Access mattered more than titles. If you could whisper in the emperor's ear, you held power. Even without a vote, Roman women, especially in the imperial period, could own property, inherit wealth, manage estates, sponsor public works. Wealth created leverage. Wealth created independence. Wealth created influence. A wealthy widow in Rome could be extraordinarily powerful. Roman society valued female modesty, but imperial women had to project authority. Too visible, they were accused of arrogance. Too quiet, they were dismissed. They walked a narrow path, criticized either way. When men maneuvered politically, it was strategy. When women did the same, it was called intrigue. Many surviving sources were written by male senators, hostile to female influence, which means some reputations may reflect bias. History remembers powerful women differently. Influence existed at lower levels too. Women ran businesses, operated shops, worked as midwives, textile producers, artisans. Inscriptions show women as patrons of temples and buildings. Roman society was not equal, but it was not silent either. Empires rely on visible power, but they also rely on invisible networks. Family alliances, marriage negotiations, succession planning, domestic management. Imperial women stood at the intersection of all of it. When succession failed, civil war followed. When heirs were unstable, mothers intervened. When emperors traveled, wives managed correspondence. The throne was public, influence was private, and private power often lasted longer. Rome liked to imagine itself as masculine, disciplined, martial, rigid, but the empire was held together by households, and households were managed by women. Behind every succession, behind every dynasty, behind every imperial crisis, there were conversations happening in private chambers, and those conversations shaped history. Rome understood something early. Power must be seen, power must be believed, power must feel inevitable. If people believe resistance is pointless, they rarely attempt it. And Rome mastered that art. Walk into Rome as a provincial visitor. You see the Colosseum, massive arches, triumphal monuments, statues towering above eye level. Architecture was not just functional, it was intimidation in stone. The Arch of Titus depicts conquered peoples paraded as trophies. The message is simple: Rome wins, always. Even buildings communicated permanence. Massive stone structures said, "We are not temporary, we are eternal." When a general won a major victory, he celebrated a triumph. A choreographed parade through Rome. Captured enemies marched in chains. Loot displayed publicly. Exotic animals shown to crowds. The general wore a purple robe like Jupiter. A slave stood behind him whispering, "Remember you are mortal." Even humility was staged. The triumph reinforced hierarchy. Rome conquers. The gods approve. Resistance ends in spectacle. Coins traveled everywhere. Markets, military camps, frontiers. Every coin carried a face. An emperor, a slogan, a symbol. Augustus used coins to declare peace restored. Other emperors advertised military victories, sometimes exaggerated. Even new laws appeared symbolically. If you control currency, you control narrative. Every transaction reinforced imperial legitimacy. Bread and circuses. That phrase wasn't accidental. Grain distributions kept the urban poor fed. Games kept them distracted. Gladiator matches, chariot races, wild beast hunts. Crowds focused on spectacle rarely focus on politics. Violence became ritualized entertainment. Public unity was manufactured. The emperor appeared generous. The people cheered. The system continued. Religion in Rome was practical. Ritual mattered more than belief. Emperors were declared divine after death. Temples dedicated to imperial cults spread across provinces. Worshipping the emperor was loyalty. Refusing participation could look like rebellion. The line between politics and religion blurred intentionally. Sacred authority reinforced political authority. When an emperor fell out of favor, Rome did something chilling. It erased him. Statues destroyed. Names removed from inscriptions. Faces chiseled away. Officially, the person never existed. Memory became political territory. History was curated, not recorded neutrally. Control the past. Control the present. Rome rarely exterminated conquered populations. It did something more strategic. It integrated elites. Local leaders were granted citizenship. allowed to retain status under Roman authority. Rebellion became economically inconvenient. Resisting Rome meant losing privileges. Cooperating meant prosperity. This was softer control, but incredibly effective. Rome's propaganda was not loud shouting. It was layered messaging, architecture, coins, religion, entertainment, law, all reinforcing the same idea. Rome is stable. Rome is chosen. Rome is permanent. And when that belief weakens, the empire weakens. Many modern states use similar strategies. Monuments, national celebrations, currency symbolism, media spectacle, public ceremonies. Rome didn't invent propaganda, but it refined it into a system, and systems endure longer than slogans. When we imagine Rome, we see emperors and legions. But most Romans never ruled, never marched, never gave speeches in the Senate. They were born, raised, married, worked, worried about food prices, argued with siblings, buried parents, lived ordinary lives inside an extraordinary empire. Infant mortality was high, very high. Many children did not survive their first year. Birth took place at home, assisted by midwives. No modern medicine, no anesthesia. If a baby survived the first days, it was formally accepted into the family. The father performed a symbolic act of recognition. Without that recognition, the child had no legal standing. Roman law gave the father extraordinary authority, patria potestas. Power of the father. He controlled the household, legally, completely. Not every newborn was kept. Some infants were exposed, left outside the home. Reasons varied. Poverty, disability, illegitimacy. It was not always seen as cruelty. It was sometimes framed as economic necessity. Some exposed children were rescued and raised as enslaved people. Others did not survive. Rome's family structure could be loving, but it was also pragmatic. Wealth determined living conditions. Elite families lived in domus, private houses with courtyards. The poor lived in insulae, crowded apartment blocks. Wooden upper floors, fire hazards, shared water sources, crowded streets below. Homes were not quiet. They were social. Extended family often lived together. Enslaved workers lived inside the household too. Family life blended with labor. Privacy was limited. Education depended on status. Wealthy boys were taught reading, writing, rhetoric. Greek language was highly valued. Public speaking mattered. Politics required eloquence. Girls also received education, especially in elite families. But their training focused more on household management. Spinning, weaving, estate oversight. Most poor children worked early, helping in shops, farms, workshops. Childhood was shorter than today. Responsibility came quickly. For boys, adulthood began with the toga virilis, a ceremony marking citizenship. Transition from child to man. For girls, marriage often came early, mid-teens, sometimes younger. Marriage was rarely romantic. It was strategic, alliance building, property management, continuity. Love might develop, but stability mattered more. The Roman father held legal authority over children, wives, in some marriage forms, enslaved people. He could arrange marriages, approve adoptions, control property. In early periods, even life and death authority existed legally, though rarely exercised fully. Over time, paternal power softened, but its legal shadow remained. Adoption was common, especially among elites. It ensured heirs, preserved family names. Even emperors were adopted into succession lines. The empire itself relied on adoption for stability at times. Family in Rome was not only biological, it was legal and strategic. Despite legal rigidity, emotional bonds existed. Tombstones reveal grief. Parents mourning children. Children mourning parents. Inscriptions speak of affection, of love, of loyalty. Rome was not emotionally cold. It was structurally strict. Daily routine. A Roman child might wake early, help grind grain, fetch water, assist in a shop, practice writing on wax tablets, watch public games, hear political gossip in the forum, grow up surrounded by hierarchy. Inequality was visible daily. Children learned their social place quickly. Rome's stability did not begin in the Senate. It began in households, in disciplined family structures, in inheritance systems, in arranged marriages, in carefully managed estates. The private sphere reinforced the public one. When family structures fractured, political structures followed. When succession failed, civil war erupted. Rome's domestic life was not glamorous, but it was foundational. Behind every legionary was a mother. Behind every senator was a father. Behind every emperor was a family network. Empires expand outward, but they survive inward, through households, through generational continuity, through shared identity, and Rome understood that deeply. Empires usually leave ruins. Rome left a legal framework. Courts, contracts, citizenship rules, property rights, concepts we still use today. Rome did not invent law, but it refined it into a system. In 451 BCE, Rome carved its laws onto bronze tablets, displayed publicly in the Forum. The 12 Tables. Why? Because before that, legal knowledge was controlled by elites. Making the law public limited arbitrary interpretation. It didn't create equality, but it created visibility. Citizens could now know the rules governing them. That idea was revolutionary. Roman citizenship was powerful. It offered legal protection, right to trial, protection from certain punishments, property rights. At first, citizenship was limited. Over centuries, it expanded. In 212 CE, Emperor Caracalla granted citizenship to nearly all free men in the empire. Not purely from generosity. Taxes played a role, but the legal unity mattered. Law became Rome's glue. Rome thrived on trade. Trade requires trust. Trust requires enforceable agreements. Roman law defined ownership, debt, inheritance, partnerships. Wills were formalized. Property transfers documented. Even guardianship rules were regulated. This stability encouraged commerce across vast distances. From Britain to Syria, legal predictability made empire profitable. Legal disputes were common. Land disagreements, business conflicts, family inheritance battles. Magistrates oversaw cases. Advocates argued. Rhetoric mattered deeply. Public trials were dramatic, but structured. Procedure mattered. Evidence mattered. Reputation mattered. Law was performance, but it was also system. Roman law was not modern law. It allowed slavery, patria potestas, paternal authority, class distinctions in punishment. Elite citizens could avoid certain penalties. Enslaved people could be tortured for testimony. Equality before law did not fully exist, but procedural structure did. And structure is powerful. Rome conquered diverse cultures. Instead of erasing local customs, it often integrated them. Provincial law adapted under Roman oversight. This flexibility reduced rebellion. People felt less culturally erased. Law became a tool of stability, not just control. Roman jurists refined legal reasoning. They debated interpretations, developed legal principles. Centuries later, Emperor Justinian in the Eastern Roman Empire compiled the Corpus Juris Civilis, a massive legal codification. It preserved Roman legal thought long after the Western Empire fell. Medieval Europe rediscovered